So we are live. Welcome to the Greatness Engineering Hour show, the show where we bring you people who come and share, particular knowledge and share their stories, share their expertise for you to be able to know what's going on around the world, or for you to be able to get some strategies on solving problem and also creating an impact in your family, in your communities, or in your country, or even globally. Why not? So today we are starting a particular series because we gonna focus on gender-based violence, and it's gonna be so we're gonna have some special shows to tackle this issue and make sure we understand, what's going on, especially in countries where, we don't actually get all the data and all the news about this key problem that's actually happening everywhere. Even here in Australia, we see the numbers going really up. So it's about time to really, try to create a debate first to understand the problem and try to find a solution, because we can't continue to see those numbers, go up. Today we're starting our campaign in South Africa, and so we're heading to South Africa. Our guest is based in Cape Town. And I don't know if you all know is that, domestic abuse is a huge problem in South Africa. At least 8 women are murdered by their partner every day. Yes, you heard really well, 8 women per day. And in the past weeks, with COVID, the number of women reporting abuse has dramatically increased, and because of the lockdown. And because what's happening is that they get locked down with their abusers, so it's very difficult to escape in this type of environment. So to talk about domestic violence in South Africa, I brought to you today as a guest Claudia Roodt. She's a clinical social worker, trauma counselor, restorative facilitator and trainer, and she's an activist against exploitation of children and human trafficking. And she and her husband started their own venture, and she's going to talk about it as well. I'll leave her to you to explain exactly what it is all about. And we're going to focus today on how the trauma or domestic violence impacts women who are being abused. And she's going to have a special interest on how the trauma sits in itself in our nervous system and control the behavior of the different women who are victims of abuse. So I'm not going to, stay longer. We're going to bring Claudia to start the conversation, and for her to give us, her view on domestic violence, especially from a traumatic point of view. So let's start the show, and make sure you share, you like, and you start watch parties, because this information is critical. You might not be in an abusive environment, but you might know somebody that is, and you really want to be able to help. So please take notes and make sure you apply, the knowledge that Claudia is going to share today in your own environment if there are people at risk. So let's start and bring Claudia to start this key, conversation on domestic violence.
And that is the power of labels, right?
On memories. But as I got older, I started to be more aware of some of the abusive sides of
So welcome, Claudia, to the Greatness Engineering Hour. Welcome. We're really, looking forward to have you and to learn from you, because you have so much experience. I'm very happy to bring you on this platform to help, my audience to understand, the trauma about domestic violence and really how to, if they can help people or help themselves, if they are in an abusive relationship, help themselves to manage this critical issue. So just to start the conversation, just want to know, because I've talked a little bit, introduce you briefly, but if you can introduce yourself to the audience and let us know who you are, what you've done, and what you're up to.
Okay, hi, and thank you for having me on the show. I'm Claudia. I am born and bred South African. I live in Cape Town. I'm 54 years old, youngest of 3 sisters. I come from an adverse background where, as girls, we had quite a tough father, and I'd always have to fight for your voice. And the only way that I could really feel his acceptance was through academics. And in my being, I always felt that relationships were more important, and that relationships is the thing that actually makes us as human beings so unique and special. Anyway, fast forward, I experienced a lot of adverse things, and due to that also developed an eating disorder in my university years when I studied social work. And unbeknown to me, I mean, it came out in therapy, but it actually had to do with my relationship with my father. And I married men that was emotionally unavailable and will give this persona of protectors. But when I didn't know so much about trauma, I didn't know that it's actually to hide a part of them and the little boy in them that need protection themselves. So I worked in different settings as a social worker, and eventually I landed up managing a child and youth care center for teenage girls who were abused. And I could relate in my own story a lot to what all of them have gone through, whether it was abandonment or abuse. And I've realized, now this is about 2009, 2008, 2009, I've realized that somewhere we're missing a link in terms of dealing with trauma, because you can talk about it, you can do behavior modification, they can even go to psychiatrists and get medication, and nothing really changed for the better. So then I, by default, stumbled upon the work of Bessel van der Kolk, Bruce Perry, Peter Levine, and especially Bessel van der Kolk, who deals with what does trauma do to our bodies, and how it actually seats itself in our cellular memory and in our nervous system. And linked to that, then I started reading the work of Stephen Porges, which deals with the polyvagal theory, and he talks about how we actually governed by our nervous system, but that it's about the experience the nervous system gets and how it then reacts on a level that your brain is not even aware of.
Mm-hmm.
And that just, it opened up a whole new world for me. And all of a sudden, I realized a lot of stuff about my own past and why I would be almost drawn to abusive men in a way,
Mm-hmm.
without me realizing it, because you're not on your conscious level drawn to them. It's on a very deeper, lower level that you're not aware of it. And yet, even though that happened, I was in a relationship with a man that I met years ago and got married in 2010. And I mean, the warning signs were there already. And I thought it's going to be fine. And yeah, horrible abuse and stuff started. And what I've realized, and looking back, is that because the abuse catches us off guard as women, we go into a freeze response. In other words, your nervous system, because often you find that you can't fight or flight, so you go into the collapse mode, and now you just sort of grovel back and survive, and then something happens, and then you're in the collapse mode again. And in actual fact, the collapse mode is your nervous system's way of trying to help to protect you. So yeah, that carried on for six and a half years, and I mean, things like he would fabricate emails from email addresses from an ex-guy that I was seeing and send it to me to see if I will respond to it, and stalk me, and sexual abuse and drinking. And the only way for me to survive was through my running that I was doing at that stage in time, which I didn't even realize it was my way of regulating my nervous system, because there was no other way for me to survive this. And it's interesting, because having been almost inspired, even though it was a survival thing when I was a child, by my father to be academical, my academics didn't mean anything in terms of helping me to survive through this. Fast forward a protection order, because I had to choose between life and death. I mean, I would be intimidated, threatened, stalked, woken up at night for anal sex, and so I can continue. And I've realized the day that I went for my protection order and dropped it at the police station to come and serve him with a protection order, and I was driving home, and I was shaking in my whole body, that for me to have taken that step of going for the protection order, the risk that I took, but that was the breakthrough, and I just needed to get through that evening, even though my body was completely out of control. And the healing actually started that night, because when I looked at him, when the police came and served him with a protection order, and I saw him standing there, I thought to myself, is this what I was scared of for 6.5 years? And then I've realized after that I want to help women understand, and not only women, but also men understand, that it's not trauma has got nothing to do with your cognition. Trauma, you can't speak someone out of trauma. I mean, people mean it well when they say to you, yeah, you're strong enough, you can get out of it. Well, if that was the case, there wouldn't have been so many women that's been stuck in domestic violence. And it is literally that in your body you feel completely violated. Your nervous system literally collapses, or it fight and flight. It can't go to the part where we can socially engage, and you can only socially engage with people when you feel I'm calm. And that calmness has got nothing to do with do you have all your faculties. It's actually got to do with how calm does your body feel. And I then made it my mission in life to help women to understand this and understand what experience and to befriend their bodies. Because also what happens is if you're so caught up in this relationship, you want to appease the man so that there's no eruption taking place, or disruption rather taking place. So you say yes to things that you actually want to say no to. And a big part of trauma healing means that I need to start listening to my body. Because the minute that we start listening to our bodies need, or our body's neediness sort of goes away. And that our longing to feel safe within our bodies is actually what makes the world a safer place. It's not whether I can have the best intellectual conversation with you. And often one needs to go back with people and see when was the first time that in your body you can remember that you felt unsafe. And I find that in the therapy that I do, in the training that I do, that's quite something for people that on a conscious level, we're not aware of the signals, or we ignore the signals that our body gives us. Anyway, so I then, in 2016, when I got divorced, I was managing an organization that deals with human trafficking. And eventually I left there in 2018 and I started a private practice with my current husband that we call Design to Connect, because as human beings, we are made to connect. We're not made to be in isolation. We're not made to be alone. And our vision and mission for our practice and our ministry is to help people heal from trauma, help them understand their bodies and befriend their nervous system and become the powerful, authentic version that God has made them to be. I'm also an associate and an ambassador for an organization called 1,000 Women, One Voice.
Mm-hmm.
And their mission is basically to fight against gender-based violence. So I do trauma training for them. I serve on different platforms for them. So that, in a nutshell, is my story. I've literally stared death in the eye in my previous marriage, and even then, even though I already started working with trauma and understood that it's got to do with the body healing that needs to happen first before the cognitive therapy comes into play. Because people need to understand the brain develops from the bottom upwards, from the most simple parts to the more complicated parts. And to heal the brain and to heal the human being, you also need to heal the brain from the bottom upwards. That's got to do with the body and regulation. It's not got to do with the most intellectual and intelligent conversation I can have with you. If I can have a human being feel safe in their bodies in my presence, I already make a difference in their lives. And that's my life mission at the moment. My life mission and vision is, if I can help people understand the wisdom that our bodies hold, and that if your body feels unsafe in the presence of someone, attend to that. Then I've made a difference, and then I've served my purpose. And we're not made for the violence that's going on at the moment. But in South Africa, we need to go and have a bigger look at that. And I'm sure we will talk about that.
So I mean, it's so deep. It's so deep, and I know that you've went through the whole process yourself and then use that to develop something to help others. And that's really, that's really key. And that's the first time actually that I actually come across somebody talking about listening to the body before the mind to actually solve this trauma problem. Because what we do sometimes, we try to understand, when there's violence and then people really abuse us, we start to think, what have we done? And it's a lot of cerebral activity, and we forget in a way the body itself, and to listen to it, and really just focusing on the body. And that's powerful, just what you just said. And I hope the audience is taking notes. And let's just have a small break and see who we have right now. It's full house, I think. So there's Marina from South Africa, she's here. We have Anastasia as well, she's watching from Cape Town. We have Sean. Sean is in Florida, and she's herself, been through domestic abuse. There's Anastasia again, and I think what Sean was saying is that we attract what we know is not good for us until we realize our worth. And that's what it's a bit like what you were saying, is that we listen to our body and we befriend our body. Because before that, when we get abused, we don't like our body, because we attract really all the bad things. And we tend to, and also say that the body is responsible for that, especially for a lot of women. And
we actually attract what's familiar, because the brain is or the human being, and the brain is an experience-based organ. So you tend to go for what's familiar, especially if you don't know what makes you feel safe in your body.
So that's a key one, because sometimes what's happening is you go through, some women go through this violence, but like you said, you mentioned it before, they people tell them, why don't you leave, why don't you do that? And they're scared to leave, because they use their brain thinking about what's going to happen instead of listening to their body. Is that the case?
That is the case. And also if I want to, well, I always say to women and people that ask me is, you cannot tell someone to leave if they're not ready to leave. The best thing that you can do for that person is to become a safe space. And a safe space means that I will hold space for you here until you ready to leave whatever is dangerous to you. But that safe space, I can't talk that into your cortex in the top part of your brain. Your body needs to realize that. And what we offer in the place of domestic violence is not necessarily being experienced by someone as a safe alternative. So if I tell you to come and stay with me, or come and stay at a shelter, but the shelter might be more geared towards rules and regulations, because they believe that keeps the woman safe, but they're not the overarching tool that they use is not relationships. In that woman's experience, and where is she going to experience it? She's going to experience it in her nervous system. Her nervous system is going to say, but these rules and the way that you treat me is exactly the same as the perpetrator, so I can just as well stay with him.
Wow. Exactly. That's and that's a correlation that we don't think about, especially we think that we're helping them, but we don't go to this extent to understand that, by putting them in an environment where there are rules, we basically reproduce the same environment. And that's where it's important to educate everybody, not just not just the women that are being abused or the abuser. It's everybody needs to be aware to know how to react if they are in an environment where they have people who are abused, so that they can help them adequately and not actually worsen the situation, because what's going on is that and
because
that's,
if your nervous system reacts, it's on a level where you're not even consciously aware of it. So if my nervous system feels, but this is exactly the same, and I can now fight and flight, which I couldn't do with the perpetrator, I'm going to run away. Now, often people don't understand that. And also we must remember that if you've been exposed to abuse, say even from childhood, the cortisol in your brain that gets secreted and puts you in a fear-driven state. You get such an overload of cortisol that later on, all you do is you scan the environment for who's going to be the next one that's trying to intimidate me, who's going to be the next one that's causing me danger. And that's when the brain can't perceive between a real threat and a perceived threat anymore. So that's why the answer to this is that she needs to get to know her body and where does her body feel safe. And women that's been in abuse feel that their bodies have betrayed them because they've allowed stuff to take place and numb themselves to just give the man whatever he wants to try and keep the peace. So it's literally a process of helping her to befriend her body again and listen to the messages that you get from your body.
Wow. So we are here today with Claudia. Claudia, we're focusing on the domestic violence, but more on the trauma side and how to handle the traumatic experience for women. So we're going to take a break and we'll come back and continue the conversation with Claudia.
Hi, I am Claudia Roodt. I am a trauma-informed facilitator and trainer. What does that mean? So trauma is very prevalent in the world and in South Africa at the moment. Where I work currently in Lavender Hill, between 3 and 10 people die every day and people are on high alert. So trauma-informed look at where do you start by helping people to deal with their trauma? And there are 3 pillars: safety, connection, and self-regulation. And I'm going to deal a little bit with each of them, because that needs to first be in place before you can even begin true counseling and requesting of people or expecting of them to deal with what has caused them to feel fear. So if we look at safety, that is the first aspect. And why do we say safety is first important? When you experience trauma, your body goes into a shock. And it's the fight, flight, and freeze response. And even though your brain organizes those responses due to a signal from the outside, it's in your body that you feel that. So what it means when people are highly traumatized is that they first of all feel unsafe in their own bodies, because the body keeps the score. And that means that the body remembers long after the brain is forgotten already. So when you start working with someone, you need to ensure that they feel safe in your presence, feel safe in your environment, which can be your office or wherever you see them. And you need to make sure that they're comfortable in that environment before you even try anything. It also means emotional safety, which often has got to do with the words that you use, the bodily expressions that you use. If any of that is going to make a person feel that they are being threatened again, whether it's a perceived or real threat, they are not going to want to be in your presence or to speak to you, because in their mind it's going to seem that the threat is there all over again. People experience triggers in their 5 senses, and if any of someone's 5 senses is being triggered in your presence, they're going to go on high alert and would not want to speak to you any further. So safety is the first pillar of trauma-informed care. And trauma-informed care also means that I change the question from what is wrong with you to what has happened to you. Just the change in the question takes judgment out, and shame gets removed, and people immediately feel more comfortable.
Wow. So, I mean, one question that I have, how successful are you? Because I imagine that those women, some of the women are really deeply wounded. How long does it take to, to rewind their system? Because especially if they've been long, carrying this trauma for years, and what support system do they need to have? Because yes, it starts with them, but they need to have the right environment as well. What type of support system that you recommend in this case?
Okay, so I think one of the first things is that you need a safe circle that understands trauma. And one of the things that I've been doing with 1,000 women is to train volunteers in the communities around what does it mean to be a safe space for someone. And I mean, safe space doesn't mean that I give you advice or that I fix your problem for you, but also not to tell you, listen, you've now been on a year therapeutic journey and how come you still haven't changed? Because the fact is, there's a lot of stuff that's been developed over the years, the trauma release exercises that they do, TRE, yoga, that's very good. Anything that you can do for you to really get to know your body and what we call regulate. So it is about helping her to find, besides a safe circle, the things that she can do to understand and feel when my body's been triggered and how to bring it back to a regulated state. But that takes time. And often people want a quick fix, or they move on already to another relationship or something else, and then there's a collapse. And that's when they normally come to me and say, I don't understand what's happening. This is a journey. I mean, I still get triggered. But I now know my body well enough to know when it's triggered. So I've explained to a couple over the weekend that all of us have got what we call a window of tolerance. So a regulated nervous system moves like this. Most of us, if we are not aware of our bodies, the nervous system probably goes like this the whole day. And I often use this to explain to people your nervous system. This is, Peter Levine uses, this is a slinky. So if you operate in the day, then your nervous system does this. Now, if you get upset by people, then it goes like this. The problem with trauma and too much stress is now it gets slammed. And that's actually an excessive negative energy that then seats itself in the part of your body that doesn't have a language. And how do you just release it? So besides having safe relationships, and it's not safe, intellectually safe, you need to find the activities that help you to release that out of your body, so that your body can, your nervous system gets back to this part again. And that takes time. And it can take a smell, a sound that you hear that immediately almost like take you back to a memory that you can't even see the correlation between what's happening now and what's happening in the past. And when you then go and sit and you calm your body down, you will realize the connection. And it's literally a process of being in touch with what is my body telling me, and do I know when I'm out of my window of tolerance, and understanding if you get a trigger, first calm your body down, because once the body calms down and the nervous system calms down, the new cortex, the sophisticated part of the brain can come online, and you can start working out, okay, what is it that's triggered me, and where is the correlation between something of the past. Like I've smelled the same aftershave that my ex-husband has used one day, and I was standing at the tire place for our work car, and I couldn't understand why. I just wanted to run and hide. And then when I calmed my body down by breathing and doing exercises, I've realized, but the guy that was helping me was actually wearing the same aftershave.
Wow. Wow. So
Stephen Porges always says, if you want to make the world a safer place, make it physically a safer place for people, where your body can, regulate itself.
So, and it brings, this a key thing, which is, making sure that we use our body and we talk to our body and listen to the body, because that's something that we don't really do a lot. And I see that it's very important. So things like, activity, having, activities every day, even in a normal setting, it's really important to manage the stress, to manage all the negativity around us, and to be able to function, properly, if I can say that.
Absolutely.
You talked about this, and I like it, with this zone of tolerance. And I don't think a lot of us know actually what this zone of tolerance is, until we get, we get challenged in a way. And especially, in an abusive relationship, then we start to really see, okay, there's something off right now. But I mean, there's been, especially in South Africa now, there've been a recrudescence of, violence, and we've seen, women being killed. Like, when I was introducing you, I was looking at the numbers, 8 women per day being killed in their relationship. So how do we tackle something like that, with your knowledge, with what you've done, and you've worked in different environment, in the prison environment, with, domestic violence and trafficking, and what's the roots, basically, because at the end of the day is to understand what it is. And I see that, there's a lot of work done with the women that are wounded, but what's happening with the abuser? How do we solve the problem for them to stop abusing?
Yeah, so I appreciate the question that you ask. South Africa has got a long history of violence, and I, as much respect as I have for the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that happened, I think that they didn't even touch the tip of the iceberg of all the atrocities and violence that happened in South Africa. And there's an underlying culture, that is that is deeper, that is systemic, and I mean it's all over the world, but if we focus on South Africa, it's very deep here, and so what happens is, if I have never felt in my body safe with anyone in my environment, my brain stays in the bottom part of the brain, which is the survival part, which literally keeps me alive and keeps me safe. So what then happens is I live in my survival brain all the time, and survival brain is the same as an animal's brain that's called a reptilian brain. And an animal, when it's violated or feels threatened, will kill. And for me, I almost want to say that in South Africa, if we're not going to look at and have conversations in circles and go to the deeper part of how our bodies feel when we in conversation, if we're in dialogue with one another, if we're in communities, to understand one another and understand one another's history, we're not going to get anywhere, and people will stay in a survival brain, because the brain is like a pyramid. If our cognitive brain is supposed to be the biggest part of our brain, but if I had to fight for my survival and fight for my safety and fight to have a voice and fight to have attachment and fight to have a job and fight to just have my basic rights, then the brain's pyramid look like this, which means that the survival part is the biggest. Now you can imagine, if most of the country's people's brain's pyramid look like this, it means that most of the people are living in their survival brain. And that is why there is so much violence, because if I don't feel safe with someone, I'm not going to be calm enough to say, no, but you're not hearing what I'm saying, because my body is in a survival state, your body is in a survival state, and what you then get is a collective trauma response. So it's like an infectious disease. We all react together in our survival brains, and all we do is we keep on being in our survival brains. And the only way that that's going to change is if you and I, for instance, have a conversation, but I can stay calm during your display of whatever your body is showing me at the moment that you're going through, and I'm not getting worked up by it, because all you need is a witness. And you know, I can carry on about systems. I mean, Wendy Ellis in America has written a wonderful paper recently around what is COVID got to do with equity. And then there's other papers that she's written around, you know, we don't have broken systems. We have systems that's exactly producing what it's designed for. So if I have a community of people that live in their survival brains, and I come in with systems and policies that they can't work through and process in their cognitive brain because their pyramid looks like this, they're not going to understand it, and they're going to continue to just live in their survival brains. So that for me is the reason why there is still so much violence. And to come to the perpetrator is, what are we doing with boys and men? You know, there's this culture that there's this violent culture that if I don't get, let me start with the beginning. We all made to belong, to be soothed, to be comforted, to have that initial connection of feeling safe and feeling wanted and I belong. Now, I firmly believe that we don't give that to our boys. There's still a culture that's being perpetuated by the media, and if boys, for instance, at the age of 12 go onto porn, they don't see a love affair, they see violence. And we don't teach boys about connection. We don't teach them about relationships. And because we as human beings are made to be in relationships, yet that's the thing that we spend the least amount of intention on. We think that must just, I don't know, somehow fall out of the air and people must just know how to do it.
Mm-hmm.
But if I live in my survival brain as a mother and a father, I can tell you now, the least thing that's going to be on my brain's attention is to spend time with my kids intentionally,
Mm-hmm.
building relationships.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because I only want to get food and whatever on the table. And
Yeah.
that's what we see in South Africa.
Mm-hmm. 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 Wow, wow, wow. It's so deep. And I'm really happy that we could have, you as an expert to really share, this knowledge, because sometimes we stay, at the superficial level, we don't really try to understand what's underneath and how, we can find, solutions and really get the time, like you said, to sit down and address the key issues instead of continuing to pass them on from generation to generation. And that's what's happening right now. So we're gonna have a break. I'm gonna just see, in terms of the audience that we have. So we have Eva is based in Pretoria. Yes, they need to build a new relationship with themselves, talking about the woman. There's Mireille sit deeply inside discussion. I'm learning so much. Thank you, Claudia. We all learning. Exact. And there's Maria. Maria is based here in Australia, in Adelaide, loving this conversation because it's also translated to my area of eating, behavior, and nutrition. Thank you for sharing. And Cordelia in Washington, D.C. I often ask, where do you feel it in your body? She's also a coach. And again, Eva saying so much insight. Thank you, Mireille and Claudia. Thank you, Claudia. I think I'm just supporting here, especially like the 3 pillar mentioned. Trauma informed is of utmost importance. Amazing work. And, and I think for a lot of the people right now today, these are, things that you're telling us, we've never heard about it. We never heard about it. And it's important to share so that we are informed and we can help people who need it and also initiate things in our own environment. You talked about, some of them are parents, and we need to be careful that we understand what you talked about, being in a survival mode and not taking the time to sit down with our children, and especially we have our boys, to give, to create this relationship and teach them how to connect. So we're gonna have a break.
Before we break, I just want to say to you this about the perpetrators. And if I'm in my survival brain, and this is a question that we in South Africa need to look at. Can I really hold someone responsible for something that he's done from his survival brain? Because I can only hold someone accountable, really, if they've operated from their cortex, which is where cause and effect, and I can understand what I've been doing, and I have intentionally do it. When you do something out of your survival brain, you didn't intentionally do it. Your nervous system overrided your new cortex because it was an instinctive thing to protect you. And what we need to start asking ourselves is, how safe do we make the environment physically for people so that they can start regulating their bodies and the top part of their brain can start coming online so that we can hold people responsible for what they do.
Wow. So I hope, the audience, you all taking notes, because this is really deep and really, special knowledge for us. And we, like you said, domestic violence is actually a key one. And it's important for us to understand the deep side, the deep inside, to understand it deep inside, to be able to help, and help the collective, because at the end of the day, we are connected with the perpetrators and the victims, even if we think we're not. So we need to be able to be part of the solution and take action and educate ourselves to help the process. So let's have a break, because there's been a lot of information, and then we're going to come back and for the last part of the show.
Away from home and too scared to return, Lungile, a mother of 10, is sheltering at Nisa, a local NGO which helps women fleeing domestic violence.
Since I was here, compared to the time I was in the place that I used to stay, it was very hard for me to think properly. But since I was here, I can feel that heaviness from my shoulder, that heaviness from my heart. It's lesser than.
Lungile wants her identity hidden. She fears her partner could find her and kill her.
Yes, she can come.
More than 12,000 women, double the usual number, have reported similar cases of domestic abuse in South Africa in the past few weeks. Experts attribute the sudden increase to women living in the same house all day long with their abusive partners during coronavirus lockdown.
Women are isolated, they're in captivity with their partners, and that makes it very difficult for them to seek help or access help.
Other countries have seen a similar trend, with the United Nations predicting domestic violence will rise by 20% globally during the COVID-19 pandemic. Factors like loss of income have also fueled tensions.
I would really urge others to come out of those abusive relationships, because really many people have died while they're sitting there thinking that everything will be okay. So maybe he will change, but they never change. Instead, you lose your life.
President Cyril Ramaphosa launched a campaign to stop gender-based violence and provide support for victims last year. It appears that very little has changed. Ade Shewa Josh, TRT World.
So campaign have been changed, and it looks like, I've been launched, sorry. It looks like it's not changing anything. So what do we do? I mean, it's difficult. It's really difficult to see those numbers going up. And I like, at the beginning of the video, what the lady was describing. It was the body, how she was feeling. And it linked to what you were explaining to us, is that it's about the body and how we respond, and how, we address, how we feel, physically. So, I mean, just to continue the conversation, what do you think is lacking, and what do you think we should do? Especially at the state level.
There's two things. The first thing also is people need to understand, and this is often where cases of abuse is not taken seriously. So if I'm triggered and I'm traumatized, and because then there's an overload of cortisol, which is the stress hormone. The overload of cortisol shuts down your neocortex, which means that, and that's also where your speech center is. So often women will come to the police or wherever they go, and they go and report it, and then they can't give a correct version or a version that makes sense. And it is literally because the part of your brain where your speech center is shuts down. So you remember in fragments, and you remember through your five senses. And often it takes weeks before they will have a coherent statement out of her. So then the police and people will say, no, she's made up the story. Oh, no, she's not a credible witness, or the case gets thrown out because the man tells some other story. But it's because her body has gone in a complete shutdown mode and there was an overload of cortisol, so her cortex doesn't work. And any guy that comes up to her then and she feels violated and her body feels the same as when the perpetrator was in front of her, is going to cause her nervous system to shut down again, and immediately she won't be able to give you any response verbally. That's the first thing. So there needs to be training among the justice people, the police around what trauma does to the body and what it means if a male police officer comes and stands, in front of you. Yeah, tell me your story. What is wrong with you? Because she's going to feel violated again. And the second part is domestic violence is a male issue. It's not a female issue. I think last week or the week before, the UN women representative in South Africa was on News from Africa. And she said, women have now done everything that they can. How are we going to get men? And if you think about it, we always say so many women have been violated. So many women have been raped. So many women have been murdered, which means it's not in the active sense for men. So men don't take responsibility. We need to change the narrative and say, so many men have killed women. So many men have violated women. Because then it's a verb and it's in the active. That's the second thing. And the other thing is, we need to start training men and have conversations with men about relationships and this power thing, this culture thing, because the other thing is men don't go against men. Men don't report men. There's this thing that if I go and report my buddy, then I will be ostracized. I went to my ex-husband's two best friends. Both of them didn't want to get involved. And men need to start coming out and call men out and say, and not in a punitive way, but say, you know what, I don't agree with what you're doing. You shouldn't speak to your wife like that in a conversation. But whenever a man treats his woman harshly in a conversation, whoever has seen another man going up to a man and say, you know what, I'm going to leave this conversation because I don't agree with this. And it's time that the men in society start looking at what have I been raised with and what am I doing to make the society a safe place for men, but also for women.
Yeah. And that's key, because like you said, we always think it's a woman problem and women are going to fix it. I mean, we have to get men involved in everything. I mean, we've been talking about women empowerment even in other areas. We can't do it alone. We need to, to have the men to be part of the conversation so they understand, the problem that we have and how they can connect with us and how they can have a proper relationship with us. And it goes, and it's even more critical in relationship at home, because then you help the process, and
the father is the one who provides the identity at home. The mother is the nurturer, and this is why so many women have got deep-seated issues, because they didn't have a father that could provide that identity. Now you look for that safety and identity, and that's why there's so many broken men. And we need to start working with those men so that they can become the figures that provide the identity for their daughters. And we don't have another broken generation that's been born and coming up. We need to start breaking these generational cycles.
And I was shocked. I mean, I was talking to a South African friend last week, and she just found out that in I think about 60% of the birth certificate, there's no information about dads, no information at all. So that's really a social issue now, because it means that there's no, like you said, there's no male figure at all. and women have to deal with everything. But then the safety, like you just educated us to today, is not there, and you continue to carry this trauma and give it, to your children, and then your children to their children, because that's the only thing they know. They've never had this presence around them. Wow, it's been, such an enlightening, conversation, and I really want to thank you, Claudia, for that. Thank you for, for sharing, all your knowledge, or part of your knowledge, because I think there's probably more than what, you've shared in this hour. And I just want to know, how do people stay in contact with you if they want to continue this conversation? Because I think it's a conversation that is ongoing, and people need to link with experts like you to understand exactly how to, not only the deep reason of what's happening, but also how to handle and help, people around them, even if they're not directly impacted.
So they can write to me at Claudia Roodt, ROODT@gmail.com. They can also check out our Facebook page is Designed to Connect. They can make contact with me there. Yeah.
Okay, all right. And anything that that you are doing, because obviously you started.
So we do online training that we provide for people around trauma, how the brain works, trauma and relationships, looking at the polyvagal theory. So we run a 6-day training that's online, and people can contact me about that, because I mean that can happen globally. I also do, both my husband and I do online Zoom sessions with people that want to understand, because often what we find is in your first 7 years, and this is the work of Bruce Lipton, in your first 7 years, you are like a sponge, and your brain gets programmed like a computer. And now maybe you've grown up in an abusive environment where the only way that you could survive was to keep quiet. But now you become an adult, and this program in your brain doesn't work for you anymore. So we then help you to look at why that's been your program, how to rewire that program and become the authentic being that you're supposed to be. And we help you also I run programs to help women to heal from their shame.
So I mean, take notes and get in contact with Claudia and to find out, a little bit more about those programs. I know even if you're not, involved in any, abusive relationship, please, get to educate yourself, get the tools, get the strategies, because there's always a neighbor or somebody that in your family that might need your help. And if you have this knowledge, it's easier to help and really help them to save them, because like Claudia was saying at the beginning, it is about life or death for some of the women. So you don't want to have, some of the women losing their life, especially if those are people that you're connected with and you have the power to help them. So thank you again, Claudia, for all this knowledge and for this insightful and inspiring as well conversation. And the work is ongoing, obviously, because the numbers are not going down. And like you said, it's a journey. It takes time. And everybody has to be involved, women and men, and that's the only way we'll be able to find a solution and to see those numbers go down and start to create, a sustainable society where relationships are getting, the attention that they have to get. Because right now, like you said, nobody pay attention to the relationship. And you explained that it's because most of us live in, a survival mode. So we don't really have time to sit down and create those relationships and nurture those relationships that actually gonna improve our life, in a way, because we are constantly in stress, and it creates, drama, trauma, and sometimes death. So thank you, and for the listener, let's go for a second round. I think there's been some new people. So if you're joining us, great stuff. I really love the topic. And then so good, Claudia. So a lot of people actually enjoy what you've shared. And I think we all learned so much today. A great interview. Only listen to the last half, but insightful information. And Marina, which has been from the beginning, enjoy it. And we also have Shian, thank Claudia, very informative. So thank you everybody for tuning in. And for those who are going to watch the replay, please don't hesitate to reach out to Claudia if you need some, some clarification, or just ask question, or just have a conversation. And please keep the conversation going. This is a very important subject. Gender-based violence is not just happening in South Africa. It's happening everywhere in the world, and we need to start to stop the spread. And everybody has a role to play. So thank you, and see you on Friday. And we're going to have another interview on gender-based violence next week as part of our series that we're running in July and in August as well. Thank you very much, and bye-bye to everybody.
Bye. Thank you.